Hey folks, I'm recording this video from the ancestral and the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Yesterday, I offered a video speaking about the 215 Indigenous children whose graves were found at a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. And it was brought to my attention through the comments, through people asking, always polite, always respectful, and through a friend's email, reminding me that the Anglican Church of Canada, my denomination, actually played a really big role. And they said that it sounded like I was blaming the government maybe a little bit too much, and not necessarily agreeing with that part, but I do feel the need to address the fact that the Anglican Church, again, my denomination, my church, ran 25% of these residential schools. We maintained and operated 25% of these residential schools. Were we responsible for abuse? Yes. We were, absolutely. I don't know of any stories relating specifically to Anglican clergy, to Anglican religious, or to Anglican laity. But we were a part of a system that took children from their families, from their communities, in order that they would forget about their culture. We took children away from their homes in order to indoctrinate them into our way of being. Not only our faith, but our culture, our customs, our ways. If no child was ever abused in an Anglican facility, if no child was ever physically or sexually abused in an Anglican-run residential school, we still committed an act of violence against those children and their families and their communities just by being a part of the system. I found a quote from a Roman Catholic bishop. It says, "We instill in them, the Indigenous children, a pronounced distaste for the native life, so that they will be humiliated when reminded of their origin. When they graduate from our institutions, the children have lost everything native except their blood." That was from Bishop Grandin. This was the overall sentiment of these residential schools. I don't know the authenticity of this quote. I'm using it mainly because of the sentiment that it shares, because this was the predominant reason. We're going to teach them to be different. We're going to teach them to be embarrassed and humiliated by where they come from. Their language, their customs, their religion, their traditions. We're going to teach them to be like us. The Anglican Church included. This isn't the first time the Church Universal, has been involved in an atrocity. These things happen whenever we, as Christians, find ourselves thinking along lines like Bishop Grandin here expresses. We know it best. And we're going to make you understand that. We know it best, and we are going to make it so that you will see that. We're going to make it so that you see the ignorance of your ways, because we know it best. This happens whenever the church forgets about who we really are. It seems like it happens every time the church, the congregation, the laity, the clergy, when we forget who we really are sitting in those pews, we take on the responsibility of making sure the world knows how they should live. Whenever we think we've got it all under control, whenever we think we know the way, whenever we think we have the power, we want to take that out into the world, and we want the world to follow us. And we will do, throughout history, we will do whatever we are permitted to do to make that happen. In this particular case, in partnership with the Government of Canada, we created these residential schools to teach Indigenous children the ways of the church, the ways of European culture, our ways. But we still do it today. We're not allowed to go that far. We're not allowed to go as far as creating residential schools, but we're allowed to lobby our politicians to write laws that will make sure that people live the way we deem acceptable and appropriate. To do or not do the things that we deem to be acceptable and appropriate. This happens when we forget who we really are. It happens when we forget who we really are, because the moment we forget who we really are, we forget about the call for us all to be humble in the presence of God. The church, the congregation, clergy included, are not perfect people awaiting for our opportunity to enter into the gates of heaven, to take our seat at the head table. We are broken. We are sick. We are sinful. We gather together not in our perfection to pat each other on the back. We gather together to hold one another up. We gather together to be in the presence of God, to be reminded of God's eternal love for us despite our condition, to be reminded of God's mercy towards us, God's desire to be in relationship with us. Our mission isn't to take our way of life out and make others acquiesce to it. Our mission is to take the mercy, the love, the compassion that God offers us, and to tell people about how God offers us those things. Not to change them. To tell them that there is a loving, universal God out there who wants to know them as they are, where they are, because of who they are. I mentioned this morning that we can't forget. We can't forget because we will hurt people. We will harm people. But from the church perspective, the other side of this, we can't forget who we are, because we will become that monster that we have become in the past. We will become that creature that feeds on the lives of others that we have in the past. We need to be Jesus in the world, not Jesus' enforcers. We have done some really horrible things. These 215 graves are a reminder of our role that we played in this trauma, in this story. We were the antagonists, the villains. These 215 graves remind us of what happens when our hubris takes over, when we forget who we really are. May the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you, may the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you, may you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that we will never again forget who we really are. Children of God, loved by God, wanted and desired by God, living within God's mercy and God's compassion and God's grace, but imperfect. I pray we will always be humble and grateful so that we won't ever become that monster again. Amen.